Hello everyone. It's a very great pleasure to be able to give this presentation at the 20th Annual Conference of the China Association for Intercultural Communication. I'd particularly like to thank Professor Sun Youzhong for his very kind invitation to give this talk, Dr. Jai Zheng for his liaison work, as well as various other members of the organising committee who've been really helpful in the lead up to the conference. I really very much appreciate your support. Thank you. I'm really very sorry that I can't be with you in person for the conference. It's always so much better to meet face to face. However, technology is still helping me meet with you, first in this recorded presentation and then live in the Q&A session. I hope this will still be meaningful for you. Now, as you can see, my topic for today is managing rapport in intercultural interaction, a conceptual framework. So here's the outline of my talk. First of all, I'll give a little background on myself, how I became involved in the intercultural field, what I see as some of the current challenges, and my aim for today's session. Then I'll introduce a case study, an authentic one told to me by an acquaintance. First, I'll explain how some interculturalists in Europe recently interpreted it. Then I'll introduce the TRIPS framework and explain how the case study could be analysed effectively with this framework. After this, I'll consider how culture interfaces with TRIPS. And then finally, I'll briefly tell you about the TRIPS tools and ways of following up the framework. So first, a little background about myself. As you can see, I went from England to China, first to Hong Kong, then to Shanghai, many years ago, actually 1974 that was, before perhaps many of you were born. And when I was there, especially in Hong Kong at the beginning, there were all kinds of little incidents that set me on this journey of looking at the intercultural field. For instance, I met a very kind Chinese young lady and she invited me to her home. And her mother served me some Chinese tea, some black Chinese tea, which was quite bitter, I felt. I wasn't used to Chinese hospitality. And so I thought, oh, I don't like this tea very much, so I'll be polite in English terms and I will drink it all. So I drank that cup of tea and sure enough, as I drank, she gave me more and I was saying, no, 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 thank you. And I kept drinking, trying to be polite, and she kept filling up my cup. And you won't believe it, but I actually drank 12 cups of tea that day. I was getting desperate. I was saying, no, 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 thank you. But that wasn't having any impact at all. And so I learned from that and many other experiences how closely interconnected language and culture are. And also how identities are somehow also mixed in. This started me on a long journey, a conceptual journey. Here I am a number of years ago in the hills around Hangzhou. And I've been, ever since those early days, trying to think through how can we best conceptualize culture? How can we best conceptualize the interconnections between culture and language use? And how do culture and language use affect relationships? I've been increasingly interested and concerned about that. So back in the early days, when I first went to Hong Kong, the traditional intercultural position was that nationality, and to a certain extent organization, affects cultural values and norms of the people from that particular national group or organizational group, and that leads to differences in behavior and potential misunderstandings. And we could see that in my example I just gave about the drinking of the tea. More recently, people are aware that it isn't just national group or organizational group. There are many other groups that we belong to, professional groups, ethnic groups, religious groups, and each of those have some socialization effects on us. Combined with this, there have been various research findings, for instance, one by Ron Fisher and Shalom Schwartz back in 2011, showing that value priorities have a greater variation. They found a greater variation across individuals within a country than across countries. And in this way, they found this was not supporting the claims that culture, national culture, simply determines values. So they found also there was a gap in two ways: the gap between values and behavior, values influencing behavior. So take the value of respect, for instance. How is it best to show it? Respect can be shown in many different ways. So there's no direct link between value and behavior. But we can also interpret it the other way around. What about behavior and value? So kissing somebody on the cheek, is this friendliness or is it a personal violation of space? That will again show a lot of cultural variation. So really what Ron Fisher and Shalom Schwartz were trying to point out is that we can't go directly from values, no matter what the group we're talking about, and directly from that to behavior. There's something in between, and we need to understand and take that into account. Now, many of you will be familiar with a well-known intercultural tool that Bennett and Bennett called DIE in the old days: describe, interpret, explain. Not a very nice acronym, so some have changed it to DAY. I don't know quite how you pronounce it. Describe, analyze, explain. And then Ting Toomey talked of ODIS: observe, describe, interpret, suspend, evaluation. And in my own work, we've called it the 3R: report, reflect, re-evaluate. So if we look at that, what you can see is that you've got interpret, analyze, interpret, reflect across all of these. And so we found with our students, we were saying reflect, try and interpret, and they struggled to do that because they didn't really know what to reflect on, or how to analyze it, or how to interpret it. And so we've been thinking about this. What could we do to provide a sort of more usable framework? So it seems to me that the challenge that we have at present in the intercultural field is, firstly, having a useful and valid framework that can help map the issues and guide us in developing resources, especially in terms of managing relationships across cultures. And secondly, to have a framework that's accessible for non-specialist professionals, but also has scope for specialists to provide more in-depth insights. So my aim for today is to introduce you to our TRIPS rapport management framework and to illustrate how it can be applied to authentic case studies, both for awareness raising and behavioural change. So in terms of our outline, that's the end of the introduction, the background. So I want to move on now to the case study. So I'll read the case study and then give you a moment to look at it for yourself. Olivia had recently started a new job with a PR company in London, UK. And soon after she started, her line manager, Amy, made her responsible for producing a monthly report for a particular client. Amy would set her a deadline for each month's report, and Olivia did her very best to keep to it. She divided up the work among the various team members and kept checking in with them as to whether they were on track to meet the deadline. However, Olivia often had difficulty getting a response from one of the team members, Rima. Rima was from Syria and was more junior to Olivia, and tension started developing between the two of them. Then, in a face-to-face meeting involving the whole team, also attended by Amy, Rima queried in quite an aggressive manner why Olivia should be managing this monthly report. "She's only new. Why should she be in charge? I don't agree with that," complained Rima. Amy explained that she'd given Olivia that responsibility and advised her that she was coming across as rather aggressive. Afterwards, Amy advised Olivia to try to put the matter behind her and to improve her relationship with Rima. Olivia was keen to do this and emailed Rima saying she hoped they could both put the issue behind them and work well together going forward. Rima didn't reply. Okay, I'll just give you a moment to look. So we've got three people: Amy, the boss; Olivia, the new recruit, but quite senior; and Rima, a more junior person. Now, I gave this case study to a group of interculturalists in Europe just recently, just a few weeks ago, and I asked them to discuss in groups these questions. So number one, thinking from each person's perspective what went wrong, thinking from Olivia's perspective, Rima's perspective, and Amy's perspective. And how could the problem have been avoided? What would you advise them to do next? So they discussed that in their groups, and then we came back into plenary and they gave me their thoughts. So first person said, "Oh, Amy was at fault. She was too laissez-faire as a manager. She should have explained Olivia's responsibilities more clearly to Rima." Then another person said, "Oh, we're confused. Why was Rima upset? She's from an Arab country, and Arab countries are high power distance countries. So why did she resent Olivia's instructions? We don't understand that." And then somebody else said, "Oh, the company was at fault. They were discriminating against Rima. They should have given Rima the right support and training so she could have done this work, and they needn't have recruited Olivia." So here we are, we've got experienced interculturalists who've all given different interpretations. Perhaps number two is the closest to the traditional intercultural approach. Number three is more from the diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective. But what we also see through all of them is this tendency to attribute blame. Number one, blamed Amy. Amy was at fault. Others blamed the company. The company was at fault. Some might have said Olivia was at fault. And this seems to be a very common tendency in the intercultural interaction, is to attribute blame, to say somebody's at fault. Whereas actually, we need to try to understand the different perspectives. And in my view, the TRIPS framework can help. So now I'm going to move on to that and explain the TRIPS framework and try to use it to analyze this case study. So TRIPS is an acronym: T, triggers; R, reactions; I, interactions; P, people; S, settings. And I've tried to capture in that all the various aspects of an interaction and that can affect how we interpret, and also any blames and so on that we might give to people. First of all, then, I'm going to think about triggers. So what we had saw in that in that case study was that you had an interaction and then people reacted in different ways, and including judgments. But there's something in between that we need to look at. The triggers, the issues that might trigger those rapport reactions. And in this framework, there are 6 of them, and I've called them the GAF triggers, again an acronym. So these are sensitivities that lead to a negative reaction if it's not handled well. Those of you who've got background in politeness theory, pragmatics, will recognize that these have come up in many frameworks. So first of all, goals. What's your goal? What's my goal? Are they being met? Are they being thwarted? If your goal and my goal is different, this can upset rapport if we think our own goal isn't being met. Autonomy. We all have a desire for a certain amount of freedom. We don't like to be controlled. And yet at the same time, we may also want to receive appropriate direction and guidance. This is a continuum from autonomy to control. Attention. Are we getting the right amount of attention? Are we included in discussions, or are we ignored? Or are we getting too much attention? And what about face? Are we given enough respect and appreciation? Are we treated fairly or unfairly? And what about ethical principles? Is what we're doing or being asked to do ethical? So these are the 6 GAF triggers in the TRIPS framework. And if any of those are mismatched across the people, this can be a problem. So let me try and explain. So we've got here, as I said, goals. Are my or the other person's goals being met? Am I or the other person being given a suitable amount of freedom? Am I or the other person being given a suitable amount of attention, care, or consideration? Am I or the other person being given enough respect and appreciation? Am I or the other person being treated fairly? And do we respect each other's ethical principles? So these, as I say, are the 6 GAF triggers that can cause rapport risks. So if we think now first from the point of view of Olivia and Rima, and so we've got here these 6 triggers, and we need some kind of alignment. If there's a misalignment, there will be disturbed rapport. If they're aligned, that tends to lead to smooth rapport. So from Olivia's point of view, her goal was to achieve the effective project, get those reports in, and she needed Rima to respond to her emails. Then in the actual meeting, when Rima made those comments, that was a threat to Olivia's face. Then we think from Rima's point of view, she didn't like being told what to do by Olivia. She felt that this was not Olivia's right to do that. She felt she was new in the job and that this was unfair, that she should have had that opportunity. So we see from this, people may prioritize the GAF rapport risks differently, like the relative importance of goal versus autonomy. So Olivia was so focused on her goals, she was not really giving Rima much autonomy. And of course, people may interpret one or more of the GAF rapport risks differently, like what counts as unfair. So Rima felt this was unfair, that she was not being given the responsibility, but as far as Amy and Olivia were concerned, it was very fair, and so on. And these kind of differences are likely to be more pronounced in global contexts. So I would say everyone needs to be mindful towards their own and others' interpretations and prioritization of the GAF rapport risk factors. So you've got these triggers that we've just looked at, and then those lead to reactions. Now, we've already mentioned some of those, but let's think a moment about emotional reactions. This is saying, what emotions are you experiencing and how intensely? In our book that I'll tell you about at the end, we have a framework for thinking about that because work in emotional intelligence indicates that the more you are able to verbalize and to think through your emotions, the more it is helpful to overcoming them. You also need to think, how far are you or others, how far are we displaying our emotion, and how well can we perceive other people's emotions? But then not only the emotional reactions, it's the judgments that we make, these evaluative reactions. So what judgments do we make of the others? And what led us to make those judgments? So here we see Olivia's reactions towards Rima, and generally she was frustrated with her. She disliked her, actually. I talked to her about that. She was frustrated that Rima wasn't responding to her emails. She was embarrassed when Rima made those comments in the meeting. She was worried what Amy would think of it. She was also worried about how to get the report done on time. And she felt that Rima was incompetent and difficult to deal with. So she was making judgments as well as feeling those emotions. And I met Olivia around about that time, and she was clearly really frustrated and upset about the whole situation, feeling it did affect her work and her sense of pleasure at the work. And then if you think of Rima's reactions towards Olivia, we don't have much detail because this was Olivia who told me the story, but overall it was negative emotions, it seems, and negative evaluations. It seems Rima didn't like Olivia either. And then Amy's reactions, again, in terms of emotions, no detail given, but she came across as being quite detached from it. And I think that's why one of the European interculturalists talked about her laissez-faire manner. In terms of evaluation, she was just putting all the responsibility on Olivia and saying Olivia should make peace with Rima, that it was her responsibility to do that. So we might think, why analyze reactions? In fact, there are several reasons for this. Managing emotions is an important step in the whole cycle. If we don't do so, our emotions may fester and we keep those negative feelings. So it is important for preventing emotions from staying with us negatively. And as I mentioned, clarifying emotions can in itself help to reduce their intensity. And understanding different people's perspectives can help reduce our emotions and avoid unfair evaluative judgments. So the TRIPS triggers, the idea is that by thinking them through, you get a clearer picture of why different people are reacting in different ways. So what we've looked at so far in the TRIPS framework is we've had the case study, which was the interaction. I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. But then we have the triggers that could be causing rapport problems and the reactions that people have. And these are often the things that we deal with in the intercultural incident. But to understand them more deeply, we need to go more deeply and see the factors that are giving rise to them. So, interactions. This would be the message content. In other words, what is said or not said. Now, I just say at this point, in discourse studies, it's always analysing the actual discourse, but in my experience with rapport management, it's often what's not said or done that's the problem. And you could see here it was Rima's lack of response to Olivia's emails that caused Olivia a lot of the problem. Then you've got communication style, the manner in which the message is conveyed, and the communication dynamics, how people participate in the interaction, how they're included or perhaps excluded. So in terms of this particular case study, we've got, well, what exactly did Olivia say in her emails to Rima and the other team members? We don't know about that. What Rima exactly said in the team meeting, whether Olivia's responsibilities had been explained to Rima, all of these are important details that we actually need to know. So if we look at, again, a little bit more detail, Rima's failure to respond to Olivia, I wonder why. What might it signify? Was that an indication that she was unhappy with Olivia? And then you've got Rima's public complaint. She's only new. Why should she be in charge? I don't agree with that. The style here, Amy saw it as aggressive. Now, all of this, linguist communication scholars have a huge amount to offer here to give a lot of insights into the interactions. Now, the problem I found with non-specialists is that linguists can provide so much detail that it's really just the interactions itself, and people get lost in that detail, which is why I've been trying to provide this broader framework. Then there's the people down here. Who are involved? How many of them? What are their characteristics? Is their nationality relevant? What about their personalities, their character? What are their links and connections, their role responsibilities, attitudes towards each other? So key issues here might be the number of people at the team meeting, each person's identities, and again, and language proficiencies. How proficient was Rima in English, for instance, and each person's responsibilities for managing and producing the project reports. So again, if we think of this particular example, the number of people, we don't know exactly, but there are certainly more than 3, because you've got Amy, Olivia, and Rima, and there were others there, but we don't know exactly how many. English was the second language for Rima, or anyway, not her first. She was from Syria. And then you've got participant relations, hierarchical relations. Was it clear to them all? Distance, closeness. How well did Rima and Olivia know each other? So here you've got the sort of classic power and distance aspects that would come in the Brown and Levinson framework. And then role responsibilities, levels of authority. Was this clear to them all? Who was doing, that Olivia was in charge? Work-related rights and obligations, how were these allocated? Are they clear? So lots of things here. And again, both linguists and psychologists have a huge amount to offer here in helping us dig deeper and understand. And then finally, within our TRIPS framework, you've got settings. And here, I think it's important to consider these multi-level settings. So you've got the interaction setting, the one that in this case was a meeting. And then you've got the organizational setting, the PR company that it took place in. You've got the societal setting. Here it was set in the UK. And then there's the world setting, the whole world economic situation that could be affected. We saw with COVID, for example, how much world factors could influence things. So again, looking more detail, you've got the type of communicative event, the organizational culture, and the national or international context. And in this particular case, you've got the interaction setting was a team meeting. So we need to ask ourselves, what were the normal procedures for it? Who can speak when, etc.? Are there any rules or conventions re communication style? You've got the organisational setting. It was a PR company. What's the culture of the organisation? For example, in terms of hierarchy, was it very hierarchical? Did it give people a lot of autonomy? How was time managed? What about hybrid working, working from home or in the office? This has become a big issue since COVID. And then the national setting was in the UK. Does that differ from PR companies in Syria? I don't know about that, I'm afraid. And here again, in terms of giving insights into settings, this is where the intercultural field has traditionally had a huge amount to offer, but probably more in terms of the national or organisational setting, and probably linguistics, pragmatics in terms of the interaction setting. Okay, so that's an introduction to how we might analyse the case from a TRIPS point of view, the incident, but actually I met Olivia a few months later, and she told me what had happened afterwards. So I'm going to say now a little bit about how the case study was resolved actually in real life. So we may, as it turned out, Rima was unhappy, and we saw this before, about the level of autonomy that she had. Why should Olivia tell me what to do, was the answer. And first of all, Olivia made changes in terms of the autonomy that she gave. So originally, when her boss, Amy, said to her, this is the deadline for the report, she just accepted that and didn't dispute it, and then just or question it, and then just told her team, this is the deadline. So one change that she made was to ask the team, is this project deadline workable for you? Because they all worked on multiple projects, and it could be that it would be unrealistic. If they said they couldn't manage it, she would decide to go back to Amy and said, and try to negotiate that deadline. That was one change that she made. Secondly, instead of, first time, she just told the team, you do this part, you do that part, you do that part of the report. And this time, and now she made the change of asking them which aspects of the report they would like to do. So what we found was that Olivia made significant changes around this issue of autonomy versus control. Initially, she had, for some reason, I don't know quite why, because she's a very mild sort of person, but she's perhaps just quite obedient, and so she just accepted what Amy told her, and she also just gave those instructions. Now she made a big change in terms of handling of the autonomy, so that now they were aligned in their desired level of autonomy. The second area was around Rima's style of speaking. So this is not a trigger now, but this is going back to the interactions. And prior to this, Olivia felt that Rima didn't like her because she was always very blunt in everything she said to her. But bit by bit, Olivia noticed that Rima was the same with everybody in the office. It wasn't just her. And she came to realize that this was not anything personal about her. This was because of Rima's level of proficiency in English. Rima is a second language speaker, and of course we all know it's very difficult to handle some of the nuances in a second language. So when I met Olivia after this initial incident several months later, and I asked her, oh, how are things going? And she said, oh, we're really good friends now. That's why I was surprised. I asked her to explain, and these are the differences she reported. Very positive reactions now. Two major changes. One was around autonomy, and another was around just understanding what it means to be a second language speaker, and how that can affect how you come across, whether you're being polite or not. So I think if I think back to what the group of interculturalists suggested at the beginning, none of them actually were able to pick up on what really happened in this particular case. And that's why I feel digging more deeply, thinking through triggers and reactions, as well as the interactions, people and settings, can help us more. So then you might think, okay, so then where is culture actually in TRIPS? So I'm going to take a moment now to think about this. So you could look at it from this angle and say, we've got multiple group memberships, and we've got that lead to shared socialization experiences, common sense of identity, similar ways of thinking and behaving, and these give rise to both risks and opportunities when interacting in situations of cultural diversity. All of this interacting with people's personalities and personal histories. And that leads to three potential main outcomes: them and us attitudes, when you see as, oh, not my group, I'm different from you, which can lead to discrimination and exclusion. There may be misinterpretation and misunderstanding, as was the case for me right at the beginning with my tea example. And you've got here misinterpretation and misunderstanding between Olivia and Rima. But there's also the potential with this, the important new insights. So that, if we go back, that's the traditional, well, I wouldn't say traditional, that would be seeing things very much from an intercultural perspective, starting with the identities. And I think with the TRIPS, it's probably what I would say is the starting point is interactions rather than social groups. And I would see culture as framing all these aspects rather than starting with the notion of groups, but seeing it as infiltrating, you might say, all of these aspects of TRIPS. So clearly, the most obvious link is with settings. We've talked about that, different norms and then different expectations for a given type of communicative activity, like in a meeting, who can talk when, etc. Lots of research on that. And then you've got societal norms and schemas and values. A lot of work done again on that. Then when we think of people, some of those values will have an influence on perceptions of hierarchy and role responsibilities. What does it mean to be a teacher, for example? What are the roles? And there may be national differences in this, certainly, but there will also be individual differences. So it seems that Olivia, for example, was very, did operate from a very hierarchical point of view. You then got different communication styles, like levels of directness and indirectness. And of course, with Edward Hall, you've had a lot of work on that high and low context. So, and things like sequencing in a meeting and so on. So a lot of cultural norms and expectations take place in the interactions. And then all of these aspects can influence the triggers, and maybe lead to different prioritization of the different elements of the triggers. And then finally, you've got reactions, things like the cultural acceptability of showing emotional reactions, where there can be a lot of cultural influences. So in other words, in the TRIPS framework, culture is seen as obviously starting in a way through the group socialization, but actually impacting and influencing and infiltrating each of these components, and that it's important to look at each of them. Okay, now into the last section of the talk, I want to say a little bit about the TRIPS tools. And I mentioned right near the beginning about those different ones like the DIE or the 3R. And in our latest book, we call that the reaction management tool. So the first one, where record, or it could be describe, or report, note down the facts of what happened. And it isn't, in my view, just what was said and done, but actually also the people and the setting, as we've seen. That's really important. So it's not just the interaction, trying to avoid the reactions, but including the interactions, what happened, and the people involved, and the settings. And so TRIPS can act as a guide for what to note down. And then secondly, in terms of reflecting on why it happened and the reasons for your reactions, this is again using the TRIPS as a guide. So in our latest book, here we actually refer here, as I say, to the reaction management tool. We have a whole chapter that explains step by step how you can work through those feelings of being upset or annoyed using a case study to illustrate that. Other chapters in the book deal with conflict, and we have the discord management tool, silence, being excluded in meetings, the participation management tool, troubled by colleagues, the cooperative colleague tool, problems with bosses, upward management tool, exercise by leadership, supportive leadership tool. And these templates, so there's a chapter on each of these in the book, and then templates at the back of the book giving detailed step-by-step guidance for each of them. Why did I do this? I mean, one of the reasons was that actually some of my former students, Chinese, but it wouldn't necessarily be Chinese. I mean, Olivia was not Chinese, have actually experienced lots of problems with their bosses working in UK organizations. And so I decided to try and find a framework that would, and some practical advice to help them. And so these tools try to combine insights into the issues, like the insights into conflict and problems of exclusion, etc., but also giving some practical guidance that hopefully is also culturally sensitive. Okay, so follow up. I've mentioned a few times the new book. This is what it's called, Making Working Relationships Work, the TRIPS Toolkit for Handling Relationship Challenges and Promoting Rapport. Has 3 parts. Part 1 is foundations, introduction, and then an overview of the framework. Then part 2 deals with relationship challenges at work, 6 chapters. 3, 4, and 5 deal with issues, upsetting and annoying experiences, conflict and exclusion. And then 6, 7, 8 deal with role relationships with colleagues, direct report to boss relationships, and boss to direct report relationships. And then part 3 is for those who want to dig more deeply. As I said, we've got the introduction to TRIPS in chapter 2, but then in chapters 9 to 13, it gives the framework in a lot more detail. And then at the end, there are templates for all the TRIPS tools and frameworks. So, okay, what kind of content? So as I think I've mentioned, background information on issues like emotions or conflict. What have we found in previous research on that? Numerous authentic case studies throughout the book, numerous activities for discussion and reflection, detailed support on handling the tools, key takeaways at the end of each chapter with the core insights and applications for practice. There's follow-up reading and references for deeper study, and as I said, templates for you to use the tools for yourself or with students. And if you're interested, there's a free download of chapter 1 on our globalpeopleconsulting.com website in the books section, and the link is there. Some of you may or may not know also, if you want to take a very much more intercultural perspective, our book Global Fitness for Global People has done that. We talk about global fitness development cycle, global fitness in practice, global fitness engagement, and the global fitness environment. It's full of lots of stories, cases, critical incidents, again, all of them authentic. This is really important to me, that we only use authentic case studies, issues that really happened. There's tools again for personal learning and development and reflection activities, and every chapter ends with key takeaways and core insights, as well as applications for practice. And again, there's a free download, this time part of the chapter, again on our website, globalpeopleconsulting.com, in the book section. Perhaps I should also say that on our website, under Insights, there's lots of free material on culture, communication, rapport, etc. So I do encourage you to take a look at our website and just use the materials as will be useful to you. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you for listening and bearing with me through this. And now I'll be very happy to take any questions that you may have. Thank you.